How is everybody out there? Hi. 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 Well, that's what brings us all here tonight, isn't it? So, we're here tonight to talk about a legislative piece that we're hoping we can get a legislative body to pick up. It's called Lowest Priority Marijuana Enforcement Statute. How am I sounding out there on this mic?
I can hear you fine.
Is there a lot of reverb in it?
Not nearly enough.
Not enough cowbell either. Does that sound better?
Yes.
It's okay. As we know, right now, our current system is arrest them and lock them up and keep them as long as you can. And no matter how many, for the years and decades that we have demanded legalization, decriminalization in Georgia, they're just not going to give it to us until they figure out a way to make money off of it for themselves. Not all of them, but a lot of them, as we've evidenced with the medical marijuana bill. And so Stephen George, to my right here, Stephen called me one day and said, we need to go for a low priority marijuana enforcement statute that will cover the whole state of Georgia and stop simple arrest or possession, simple possession arrest overnight, immediately. You won't be breaking any federal laws, and they can't say, as you know, a lot of the advocates that went out here and tried city by city decrim only to run up against opponents who are saying that y'all are just trying to skirt state law. Well, with this, they can't say that anymore. They'll have to come up with another excuse. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and let him tell you why he thinks that a low priority marijuana enforcement statute is important to Georgia.
Thank you, Teresa. My name is Stephen George. I work for the state's lead mental health agency. I have a master's degree in public administration with a clinical concentration in college student success and enrollment services. But and my grandmother was a medical marijuana patient and was honored as the state's honorary great-great-grandmother for the state, yes. God rest her sweet soul. Now, for the low priority marijuana enforcement statute, there's a couple of things you have to remember. Okay, we have to frame this issue a little bit. Okay, now first, you always hear the police say, well, we don't make the laws, we just pay to enforce them. Well now, but the sheriff, the office of the sheriff is the only law enforcement agency in the state of Georgia that is mandated to enforce the law, all of the laws, without favor or malice. Okay. All other law enforcement agencies merely have the authority to enforce the law. So that's why the Sheriff's Association always says, well, we have to make an arrest. We're mandated. It would violate our oath. Well, so let's fast forward. Among other things, among crime, we're in the middle of an opioid crisis. There's a lot of other things that are going on right now. And the statistics bear out that most people arrested for marijuana are arrested for misdemeanor marijuana, especially young men of color. That typically is their first arrest. And what a lower priority marijuana enforcement statute could look like would be something that says something like this. Due to limited manpower and resources and due to the need to address these other more violent cases, that if a law enforcement agency has so much as one open case of a violent felony, by statute they would be forbidden to initiate a misdemeanor marijuana investigation. Now what that does is legislating priorities. and that doesn't violate federal or state law. There would be some laws that would be typically exempt, you know, things like maybe, you know, DUI, you know, there's
Distribution.
distribution, things like that. But it's a good middle road, I would suggest, it's a good middle road step in the spirit of harm reduction. And the prohibitionists, it takes away their argument that it violates federal or state law. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Ted, a lot of people ask me, well, what's the difference in the city by city decrim and
Civil citation bill.
and this lowest priority marijuana enforcement statute? Could you explain that?
Briefly, first of all, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ted Metz.
I'm sorry.
How was everyone tonight?
Hey, Ted.
I bury my nose in the law and the history of law, so what I can say about, what was the question again?
What's the difference basically
The
in
difference between
city
a
decrim?
municipality legalizing
Yes.
versus this lowest priority statute, it would be a statewide statute. Therefore, it would be applied statewide. You know, any municipality has the authority to enforce the law on the books the way that they want to. You know, now a statewide statute would force all the other counties to follow suit. And for that reason, they can't weasel out of it saying, oh, you know, we want to keep busting people for marijuana possession. But I hope you ask some other questions beyond that. If I answered the question,
They might
guess
be,
I'm
I have a
okay.
question, they might be forced, if they have a, and this is just a maybe, if they're, have a, what do you call it, lower.
The lowest priority.
Priority statute. The officers you're talking about may be induced or inclined to file greater charges on the individuals.
That's something that we need to write down and write that into the law, that they can't trump up charges.
Because they could say, well, you have an ounce and a quarter, or you had a possession with intent.
Well, and this is the other alternative. See, Colorado, for instance, legalized marijuana because they couldn't get a jury to convict anyone of
Well, that's a
possession.
problem too. You should always.
And then New York, actually, the New York Attorney General, I believe in 2017, wrote a memo to all of the district attorneys to not prosecute marijuana possession charges.
Because the juries weren't coming forth with a true
And
bill.
the thing is, if every person who's arrested for possession of marijuana in Georgia
Ask for jury.
demanded a jury trial, they would drop that like a hot potato because that's a huge waste of resources.
Well, when our lawyers get to the point where they're not so greedy
Well,
and
right.
can just give a little bit, you know, instead of charging outrageous amounts to represent our people, then maybe we can get something like that going.
Amen.
But right now, when you've got lawyers charging $100,000 to take that to court.
Can we get another outside association of?
Well, right here tonight, we're going to talk about the lowest priority marijuana
lawyers.
enforcement.
Please, sir, hold your questions till the end.
We got lawyers.
Well, but yeah, we just want to get an understanding of what this is all about and how it can affect change virtually overnight. So,
What's the next question, Teresa?
I would like to,
Steve has a comment.
I have something to add here. A lot of, when you talk to the politicians, when I've talked to some of the politicians about this, most of them are all on board. And then they'll say, but you gotta get law enforcement on board. Well, see, that's a false assumption, because let me tell you something. This is a quote from one of the most senior law enforcement officers in Cobb County. I'm so tired of listening to people cry on their way to jail after being arrested for their marijuana. I wish it was legal. It probably should be. It would make my job a lot easier. So don't blame the police. Blame the politicians. They're holding the police like human hostages. Okay, they're human shields. Now, I'm not talking about, these young kids that are just new to the street, but when you talk to a senior police administrators, they're not worried about this pot.
Because there's no violence associated with it, for one thing.
Well, they are today.
Well, Stephen, this question is for you. What would be the process that we're going to have to go through? Of course, we've already talked to legislators who are very eager to get on board with this. But what would be the process that we would have to go through?
Well, I would suggest that, actually, there's a couple of constituent days coming up at the Capitol. I would encourage people to go in the lobby, but what you do, you lobby your legislator. What we need 2 or 3 legislators from the Republicans and 2 or 3 from the Democrats to co-sponsor a bill. And then as they put it together, and then, submit it to the hopper. To, try and get it voted to, become law.
Well, I
want to comment on that because there's an
follow
alternative.
up here. What I was referencing was describing the process once we have a legislator ready to sign on.
Well, and that's what I want to speak to, because we have experienced that with the Libertarian Party, because we've done that a lot. Essentially, we need to have like one legislator that will sign for us basically to go before the Legislative Council, who are the people at the Capitol that actually write the legislation. They will allow us to sit with them. They will draft the legislation. We tell them what they want, and then we get the bill sponsors to introduce the bill into the hopper. And that's we can do that. We just need one legislator who's willing to sponsor a bill through Legislative Council. We sit down with them and talk.
Well, I didn't make myself clear, but we would have to work with the legislator to get the language.
That's all Legislative Council stuff.
To a lot of people who don't understand the legislative process,
An outline.
you have to work and get the language that you want in there and agree upon it, and then get them to enter it into the hopper. Hopefully, it'll get pulled, get in committee, and then we'll get out there and fight for it, push for it.
Then we get a floor vote in the House, and then it'll cross over to the Senate, where they go through the committee process again, and then goes to the Senate for a vote, and then goes back to the House. And, it's kind of crazy the way it works.
Well, I'm going to kind of interrupt this for a few minutes because we have a guest here, Senator Harold Jones.
Yay, Harold Jones from Augusta. Augusta, Georgia, in the house.
Come on up here and get in front of a microphone. I'll give you mine.
Bring golf clubs with you.
Harold has been entering decrim bills forever.
Come on in the camera shot.
And he's
Here, sit right here and talk to the mic.
He's going to talk about the bill that we need to get behind and support this year. All of us, more of us.
Thank you. So this is a great conversation to have, quite frankly. So we've actually kind of put together a bill like this, which would make misdemeanor marijuana up to 1/2 ounce a code violation only, or basically no criminal penalty. It would be up to a fine of only $300. And we're actually going to probably lower that fine to $100. And then we were going to up the felony amount to up to 2 ounces. Currently it's 1 ounce. That actually passed Senate Judiciary a few years ago. Then it got redropped, but then COVID hit. And so that kind of ended it for the next time. And so the plan was basically to do this again. So a similar type bill has actually passed Senate Judiciary. It was just a matter of getting it to the floor of the Senate. And so it usually is like a 2-year process. And so that bill went through in 2017, it went in, and your best bet is to do it when it's not an election year. So what happened is 2017 it actually passed Judiciary, 18 is an election year, it's not going to go through. 19 we redropped it, but then in 20 COVID hit, and so therefore we were kind of stuck at that point. And so we're basically going to be doing the same kind of legislation, but it's very similar legislation what's being discussed right now, which says up to 1/2 ounce would be just basically a county ordinance violation with up to fine $300, no jail time at all. And then from 1/2 ounce to 2 ounces, actually is going to up that to 3 ounces. It would just be a misdemeanor charge. That's all it would be. My original bill, which was done some years ago, actually said there would be no felony possession at all. That didn't get any traction at all, so you have to be kind of realistic. So this one here, the key thing is up to a ½ ounce. There'll be no jail time, no even possibility of jail time, not even a possibility of probation. So, and then from there, we take it up to 2 ounces for a misdemeanor. And actually, I was going to up that this year to 3 ounces. So, kind of like the conversation that we've been kind of having. Got to be realistic in this legislature. 3 is going to be pushing it, quite frankly. And that's the key thing. The key thing is that you want to actually try to do something that's going to pass, or just drop something for the heck of dropping it. So, when I dropped the bill some years ago dealing with no felony possession at all, we didn't even get a hearing on that. But the intent was to just kind of go high and then just see what the body was, where the body was. Then when we did the bill to say up to 1/2 ounce, no jail time, that actually got through Senate Judiciary. The next step would be to get it through the floor. But as I said, once you hit an election year, it becomes problematic. So the key thing is when it's a non-election year, and of course this year will be a non-election year. Once you get into an election year, it becomes more problematic to get big bills like that passed. So that's kind of like where we're standing now. That bill is going to be dropped this week, as a matter of fact. Very similar language. The different language would be it goes up to 3 ounces instead of 2. And then that gives you a little bit of room to work, because you might get some traction to where we say, well, we'll take it down to 2 if we can pass it to the floor of the Senate. So we'll see. But there was will of the body at least to get it through Senate Judiciary at one point in time. And I think if it wasn't for circumstances with COVID, we may have been able to get it through a second time and possibly got it to the floor. But those things didn't happen. And so everything kind of got pushed back. So that's where we are right now. Yes,
Senator Jones, how can our organization help you get this bill passed?
well, I mean, so I think one of the good things is to have it do a dual track with his House and the Senate. And the main way to help is we need to talk to members of the judiciary. I mean, that's the first step. So members of the judiciary.
Committee, right?
Yeah, judiciary committee. Members of the judiciary committee, we got to talk to them first. We always got to go through that step first. Got to get it through that committee first. And so when we get it through that committee, then the question is, can we get it through rules to get it to the floor of the Senate? It has gotten through committee before. So that's one of the key things. Some of those same committee members are on the committee now. All the Democrats that were on the committee are still there. And at least 3 Republicans who voted for it are still on there. So the question will be, can we pull out the other 2 out of 3 more, depending on who they are. So one of the good points is to say, this is actually passed Senate Judiciary before you voted for it. So to get it through Judiciary, we had to have Republican support. So Republicans had voted for it. And some of them are still on the Judiciary Committee. So number one is to have it drafted. I actually went ahead and gave it to Legislative Council, so they should have that finished this week, because basically it's just one word change. Then number 2, it'll be going to the hopper when we go back on the 23rd. Next week we're off. This coming week we're off. So it'll go into the hopper. It'll be a bill number. It'll go to Senate Judiciary, and that's what I anticipate it going. I will say this: we have a little bit different Republican leadership, and they're a little different, but I would anticipate it going to Senate Judiciary. And then from there, because you have members who've actually passed it before, that's when I would start saying, you start lobbying those members. And so number one, we have to figure out what members are in your districts, what members necessarily possibly live in areas that have good stories that you can tell. And number 3, persons need to come testify. I think that's the biggest hurdle that we've had so far, is persons not actually coming up to testify. Even though we got it through judiciary that one time, we still didn't have quite as many people as I would have liked to have to come up and give their stories about how felony possession of marijuana has impacted their life. Because it certainly has impacted persons' lives all over. And so I think that's going to be key too, is to have kind of like those stories be told to get it through again. Because it's difficult, I think, for a legislator to hear that when you're talking about just marijuana and still say, well, I'm not going to pass this legislation out of committee. And so I think that would be the key. So first you have working behind the scenes with different legislators that you may know. And then secondly, when it gets a hearing, I would want persons to come up, as many persons as possible, to say, how has felony possession impacted their life? I think that's going to be the key.
How does one do that?
Say again? Oh, okay, so the way the hearing works is, we'll get a hearing date, I'll get the hearing date because it's my bill, or in the House, same thing, if somebody drops one in the House, they'll get the hearing date, and then from there, we just notify a person and say this is what the hearing date will be. Now, here's the catch to that. Sometimes you may not have more than 24-hour notice for a hearing date, and I can request it. Now, once it goes in, I can ask the chairman to give me a hearing date, and if he so chooses, I remember now, it's a little bit, the way we do things is a little different. So if he so chooses, he can say, yes, I'm gonna put it on next Tuesday. That gives people plenty of time. He also may say, I'm gonna get to it, we're gonna get to it, and then what will happen is 24 hours before he's gonna set it, he says, oh, I'm gonna put this on for hearing tomorrow. You got people to come testify? That's just the reality of it. So you're probably gonna need some kind of hotline or something to say, hey, this thing's coming up tomorrow. We need people to come up.
Yeah, we actually, as Georgia Cannabis Industry Alliance, one of our missions, one of our goals of our mission is to educate people about how to go and find where the committee hearings are being held, at what time, and then how to go down and sit in the hearing and actually sign the list to stand up and speak. It's a little intimidating the first time you do it, but after a while it gets easier and easier. And when legislators start recognizing your face in the halls of the Capitol, that's a good sign, because they know that you're there to support an issue. And then when you start bringing friends with you every subsequent time and your numbers grow, the legislators understand that we are enforcing our right to have them represent us. The Georgia Constitution says that our legislators shall be amenable to the people at all times. That means they're supposed to represent us. Harold Jones, thank God, is trying to represent us on the marijuana front, so let's give him a hand for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Harold.
A politician for marijuana.
What's the chance of running a parallel bill to attempt to get it on the state referendum for citizens vote?
Probably difficult. Maybe more difficult than doing it through the House or through the actual
Would it be
normal process.
beneficial to attempt to do that at
It
this
would,
time?
but you gotta remember, it's a process. The process is for a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3. So it's probably easy, 2/3. So it's probably easy to get a simple majority to pass it. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way, but always try to be, yeah, we're probably not gonna get that changed. So my philosophy about how you do bills is always be kind of realistic about how you do it. So a simple majority, we have 23 Democrats now, so that means you only have to pull 6 Republicans on the Senate side to get a bill past 29.
I was just suggesting that because
Yeah.
it would involve a lot more citizens if they knew there were actual potential to be able to have a vote on it in an
Absolutely.
election.
Yeah, absolutely, but it still has to
It
get
doesn't
through.
matter what the legislature does, because they have hardly done anything.
No. See, the legislature has to actually give you the opportunity to vote on it.
I understand.
And so it takes
But you
2/3
don't
to do
need
that.
their permission to go and attempt to get a statewide referendum.
No, actually you do. It doesn't work. We're not a,
To vote on it, you do.
Right.
Because they can't prohibit.
Okay, we're not gonna get in an argument here. I
No, we're
wanna
not
sit
arguing.
down and think.
The public, we're not arguing, the public can pursue a
You can
state
pursue.
referendum without their permission.
of
Well,
course.
let me take some more questions out here from some other people that may have something they want to know. Is there anybody else that would like to ask Senator Harris
I
a
do.
question? Okay, would you step forward, please? We can't see you behind these lights. Oh, wow, man.
Wow, man. Hey, how you doing? I'm actually the cannabis king throughout the United States. I do a lot of work in California, Colorado, and Las Vegas, New York as well. We're trying to get it here. We've already got a couple of hookah lounges that we're ready to own in this area. The problem that I have with your bill that you're wanting to bring up is, it's okay to have cannabis up to how many ounces?
Well, it would not be a criminal offense up to 1/2 ounce.
1/2 ounce.
Right.
So let's say you mentioned 3 ounces earlier
Up to for a misdemeanor.
for a misdemeanor. Usually I carry around, not here in Georgia technically, 1 ounce of every strand that I have. So if I take 3 ounces and they're in individual sacks or jars, would that then criminalize me?
Yes.
Yes. Is there any way to put that in the bill to state that you can actually have up to 3 ounces and still be only a misdemeanor?
Well, it would be up to 3, only a misdemeanor. That's
But if they're
I think your
individual,
question
then
is
they-
if it's different than you're trying to avoid bidding top for distribution, then
Correct.
it's just
No, no, well,
being a
understand.
connoisseur.
Yeah, I understand though. You can be caught for distribution, at least in Georgia, the way the sheriffs may write the ticket or the way they can do it, if it's less than a half ounce.
So if
If
I
it's
have
bagged
3
differently,
joints,
yes, if it's bagged differently, many times they may write it as a distribution ticket. But that, you're not going to be able to, that you're not going to be able to put that in legislation and tell the sheriff. The only way you can get around that is actually by legalizing it. You're not going to be able to put something in legislation and say, you're not going to be able to charge distribution if it's bagged a certain way. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
Because here's the situation, I'm a lawyer too. So I had a client that had his stuff bagged differently, wasn't even up to an ounce. He said it was bagged differently because it was different flavors. They charged him with distribution. We actually were able to show that, hey, this is just different flavors, that's why it's bagged differently, he's not selling it. And so they did drop it down to just a simple misdemeanor, the possession charge.
okay.
But right now I can tell you that to say that you're gonna put in legislation, if it's bagged differently, it's not going to be a felony. Georgia would, the Sheriff's Association would not, they would not go for that. I'm just being, you just have to be honest.
So if it was an individual,
Say again.
if it was an individual and they're driving down the street and they had 2 joints on,
If they had 2 joints, I think they would probably just charge with possession. But understand, there's no guarantee that that would take place. So I understand exactly where you're going, but you're not going to be able to get that in within legislation. So I can write anything, but what you have to do is be realistic and realize that when I did the bill that said no felony at all, so let's understand kind of like how the conversation went. When I said there would be no felony possession at all, that was my first bill that I did. Even though there's no way you could drive a truck full of marijuana and not be charged with distribution. Those were the examples that were given by Sheriff's Association. Well, what he wants to do is you can drive a whole truckload of marijuana and just not get a possession charge. Well, you know that's not true. You would charge the person with distribution. So that's how the conversation would go. So my philosophy is we have a template that has actually gotten through a committee. That exists. It is only a first step, there's no doubt. And legalization may be the ultimate goal, etc. But you got to, at least in Georgia, take those particular steps. And that's the step that has actually shown to work. I just know from, also I used to represent sheriff's deputies too. And I'm a former prosecutor. So when I kind of talk about sheriff's stuff, I come from a base of knowledge. I used to be the solicitor for Augusta. So I'm a former prosecutor. They would not allow us to dictate how they would write that ticket, other than unless it was just pure legalization. So it's best just to stay away from that. You might be able to get through, as we did, through judiciary and hopefully get it to the floor, just saying, well, here's your base number now. But to sit up there and say, no, you can't write this a certain way, you can't, it would not work.
okay, perfect.
Well, just think how great that would be to be able to go to your dealer's house and wherever and pick up your bag of weed, drive home with it, not
In
have
a
to worry.
specific flavor.
Yeah, a couple of strange, don't have to worry about being busted. I mean, that's about as good as we could ask for right now. Come on, let's get up.
Amen. Just remember, in Georgia, a misdemeanor is 12 months in the hoot scout.
Well, not if we get a decrim bill that
Well, that's
changes
what
that.
it is, the time it does. Right now, it's 12 months in the hoot scout.
Right now, and Harold's trying to change that with his bill. You just want to be argumentative.
No, I've heard what this for 50 years.
Paul, I know, I've had to backtrack, and thank you for sharing things with me. Does anybody else have anything to ask?
May I
Okay.
ask you a question?
Who is it? Where are you
Yeah, step
at?
in front of the lights because we can't see you.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
can't see
just
you.
what portion of it has to do with medicinal uses? So victims of PTSD or anxiety, is there a portion of it that includes those that use it for medicinal purposes?
But this would be a general criminal bill, so that would be the question, since we kind of now have done it, it would still apply, but for general possession purposes. Now, it would not touch medicinal at all, specifically, if you understand what I'm saying. So if you still had up to 1/2 ounce, for whatever purpose you have it, it would still just not be a criminal offense. But you're not targeting medicinal purposes within this bill, so there's a difference. But if you still had it, for whatever purpose you had it, whether medicinal or whatever, if it's up to 1/2 ounce, it's only going to be a non-criminal offense. only up to a fine of $300. If it's above 1/2 to 3 ounces, for whatever reason that you had it, medicinal or otherwise, it would be a misdemeanor. So it would work that way. But you're not targeting that population, so to speak. I see what you're saying.
And that has
Yeah.
to do with the legalization of
Right,
it in the state.
right.
Got it.
There are groups pushing for medical immunity.
Harold has to go, so we wanted to get him up here and make sure we got him out in time for his appointment. Thank you so much for coming, Senator, and for sharing your goodwill with us. Stick around as long as you can. Okay. Now, we'll get back to the lowest priority marijuana enforcement statute. Do any of you guys, either of you guys, have anything you'd like to add to the conversation that maybe I'm not thinking about? In a couple of minutes, we'll take some questions from the audience.
I had a thought, I think I shared it with both of you before, in that we have, you know, the suburban kids, they have their Prozac and their Zoloft and their Adderall and, you know, all their zombie pills. And they can carry them around with them and take them to school and trade them for stuff. And people in lower income districts, generally, if they're smoking pot, let's just face it, they're doing it for medicinal purposes. You know, they're chilling out. You know, the white kids can get Prozac and Zoloft and what else? You know, there's a whole bunch of them. So the people who I think really want to enforce the marijuana laws the worst, or with the most fervor and passion, are actually science deniers. You've heard science deniers before? People that refuse to accept that marijuana has medicinal benefits for everyone that uses it in any form is a science denier. So let's keep that in mind when we're fighting our fight, is that this is all used as medically.
It's funny you should say that. I feel it's time to do a little history here. The state of Georgia, their policy on medical marijuana, specifically with regard to the opioid crisis, and the reason I know this is I actually forced the issue, but the state's policy towards medical marijuana related to the opioid crisis is that currently medical marijuana is not an FDA-approved MAT, medicine-assisted therapy, for opioids and opioid withdrawal, opioid use disorders. As such, the state doesn't advocate its use, okay? Now, having said that, the state is well aware of the studies concerning opioids and the reduction of opioids used in medical marijuana. And if the FDA changes their policy on medical marijuana concerning it being a MAT therapy for opioid withdrawal, then the state will readdress their policy.
Their rotten policy.
Well, there was no policy before we got them to, you know,
Move forward.
move forward. That's right. And I think it's important. Sometimes it's hard, and that's why we need you guys. We need you guys to get out there and spread the word, and to talk to your legislator, to call them, to email them, to talk to your friends about it, because I mean, it's nothing for me to walk into a room full of sometimes 1,000 cops at Chipstick in Monroe County. Sometimes maybe there's only 30 or 100 cops. But there's one thing I got there, unless they're stupid, and unless the state is stupid when they hired me, they know I'm a pothead.
A highly functional pothead.
And apparently they don't care. So things are changing. Things are changing. I have yet to take a drug test for the state.
Didn't they tell you if they drug tested you, they'd have to fire you? Something like that.
Well, they've never drug tested me. It's like, I did tell them that I was a medical marijuana patient, and that if there was any issues, I would sue everyone involved. And I know several lawyers,
Knows how to do it.
including one civil rights attorney, and that was the last conversation we ever had about it.
Well, was it you that sent edibles too after you had your surgery?
They did.
I saw the picture. So anyway, what we're going for, guys, is lowest priority marijuana enforcement statute. This will affect change in harm reduction caused by marijuana arrest. This will end simple marijuana arrest in the state of Georgia if it's passed. And
Probably shouldn't leave this.
we would love for you guys to sign up on our mailing list so that we can keep you updated on how we move forward with this, and so that we can ask your help in sharing information and doing certain things that will help us move forward.
All right, what's that website address one more time?
It is www.GCannabisIndustryAlliance.com. You can sign up from the website.
And what we're setting a goal to make people aware of when committee hearings are that are important to be at for marijuana legislation. So, keep up with our website, www.GCannabisindustryaLliance.com.
Thank you very much, Ted. We'd love that. So we're going to wrap it up. If any of you guys want to, more information about this, hit us up. We can do some Zoomcast or meet you in person for coffee.
All right, so is that a wrap? I'll go.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap. It's time to party now. Bring the
See
music
you all next
on.
time in Cannabis Land.